Welcome everyone to BVIPsych's webinar series. Today we have our Giftedness presentation. I'm May Nguyen, a school psychologist with the California School for the Blind Assessment Center, and I'm a co-coordinator for BVIPsych. BVIPsych is a National Association of School Psychologists interest group. If you're not a paying member of NASP, we also have a Google group that you can join for free if you're a school psychologist or mental health practitioner. And so a link to sign up for the group will be put in the chat by my colleague Hannah. And this school year, we are very happy to be offering a series of free webinars about various topics relating to working with blind, low vision, and deafblind students. The next webinar in our series will be a panel discussion on giftedness and visual impairment, and that will be on Thursday, September 25th. The registration link for that event will also be put in the chat. And if you're interested in presenting for our BVIPsych webinar series, you're welcome to submit a proposal via Google form that will also be put in the chat. So lots of information will come in through your chat soon. And now to the main event. Today, we are very happy to be with Mr. Brian Mullen. He is the NASP BVIPsych co-coordinator presenting today, and he's a nationally certified school psychologist and works in Tooele County School District, just west of Salt Lake City, Utah. And he graduated from Florida State University in 2018 with a MS and EDS degree in school psychology. He works with students from various social, economic, cultural, and linguistic backgrounds. Brian has had additional training working with individuals who are blind and visually impaired and works on providing evaluations and consultations in this area. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Brian. Thank you for presenting for us.
Thanks. So I'm super excited to present on this topic and to give the best of this webinar series, because it is the first, so it will be the best. Move that. Okay, so the learning objectives for today are to understand Pfeiffer's tripartite model of giftedness and its applicability to students who are gifted and blind/visually impaired, to identify general characteristics of students who are gifted and blind and visually impaired, and to learn different methods for evaluating students who are blind and visually impaired. Yeah. First, I just want to start out with some basic acronyms. The first one is 2E. So those are students who are twice exceptional. BVI, so blind, visually impaired. G&T, gifted and talented. NAGC, that's the National Association for Gifted Children. And then SPED is special education. While there's not a well-defined or overall agreed definition of giftedness, either federally through the government or between academics, this is a pretty good definition that'll help us understand what we're kind of talking about. So this is from the NAGC. These are students who have gifts and talents, have the capability to perform different talents at a higher level compared to kids their same age, with different experiences and in different environments in one or more domain. And then they require different modifications to their educational experience in order to learn and then realize their potential. And it goes on to say, students with these gifts and talents, they come from everywhere, regardless of their racial, ethnic, or cultural background, as well as socioeconomic status. They require, again, that modification of their educational and learning status. They require different and appropriate learning, so they need a gifted and talented teacher to realize their potential. They need social skills and social emotional development to meet those needs, as well as varied services, whether it's a pull-out service, whether it's an entirely different classroom, or just services where the gifted and talented teacher can provide ideas to the gen ed teacher to give to those gifted and talented students. Okay. So I mentioned that twice exceptional. What that means is it's a student who's been identified as being both gifted as well as having a disability. And generally, when we say a disability, it's being identified as under the IDEA or Section 504. And then the Individuals with Disabilities Act, it's that law that provides a free appropriate public education to students with one of the 13 classifications. So, and what we'll be talking about is visual impairments for the most part. And then how is gifted education funded in the US? Well, it's a bit complicated. So this act is what is dedicated to specifically identify and provide information about it, but it doesn't specifically fund programs. So the Javits Act will require states and local LEAs to identify how they are going to identify those programs and students. So they all have to be research-based, which makes sense. But then they have to apply for grants. So they don't automatically fund gifted and talented programs. States and LEAs have to apply for grants. And these grants sometimes come from the federal government, but a lot of times they come from the state or even charities. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, just a reminder to everyone. So visual impairments exist across the spectrum. There's no cutoff point. So there's blindness with or without light perception, low visual acuity, cortical cerebral visual impairments, so CVIs, central peripheral vision loss, some color deficiencies, or some syndromes associated with vision loss. So like Usher's, retinitis pigmentosa. So there's a broad range of these different visual impairments that can all affect a student's ability to learn or impact the ability to identify whether or not a student's gifted and talented, which I'll kind of go over a bit later. Okay. So I kind of want to go over some basic theories and models of giftedness and how it's good to have a theory and basis in how you're going to identify a model and how it's good for you to be able to share a model behind. So when you're going to discuss being able to identify a student with a visual impairment and say, no, they are gifted, when they might argue with you if you get into that situation. Okay, so going back to the early 40s-ish, a guy named Lewis Terman in California asked teachers to nominate their two brightest students. And then he used a modified Stanford Binet and took the kids with 140 IQs or above and then studied them over, I think some of the kids are still alive, were alive in the early 2000s. And people thought that gifted students were kind of mopey, gloomy, and he wanted to first dispel that rumor. And then he wanted to find the traits that made up high IQs. And then he wanted to see what kind of adults they were. There were a little few errors with this. 95 to 99% of all the people were white. So that doesn't generalize well. But this was the first way that we kind of found out some of those traits that gifted individuals had. Okay. This is another popular model, theories of multiple intelligences. It doesn't really apply well to our situation, but it's pretty well known. These are just different areas you can be gifted in. So musical, being able to apply musical knowledge, mathematical, so quantitative skills, and then the other kind of pretty self-explanatory. So Renzulli's is a very popular model, the three-ring conception of giftedness. A lot of districts in the country use this model for gifted eligibility, where the creativity ring right here in the bottom right-hand corner is being able to produce novel information and being able to throw out old ways of doing processes when it's appropriate. So you don't want to throw away well-known ways of doing something that's safe. But if it makes sense to throw it out, it's a good thing. Task commitment in the bottom left is being able to persevere doing things that might be hard, but you know it's worthwhile. And then above average ability, up at the top, is that third ring. And it is where you have kind of that traditional higher IQ, the ability to generate novel ideas, things like that. And then they all come together to either create the schoolhouse gifted type, which is the ability to perform well on academic tasks, or that creative, productive idea, where it's kind of that creativity and that task commitment. So being able to generate those new creative ideas, kind of like, I'd say it's more the kind of Mark Zuckerberg type. Not saying that I like or dislike Mark Zuckerberg, but he came up with some of those novel ideas like social media things. Right. And this is the Pfeiffer's tripartite model. There's those three tripartites. He was my professor in grad school. I'll just say that now. But I do like this model and how it can relate to individuals who are blind or low vision. So the first is that exceptionally high intelligence, where is that traditional individuals who have that IQ above the second percentile. And then there's those academically gifted students, so who perform well in class. And then this last one is those who have the potential to excel, but for some reason their potential is kind of dropped down. I'll explain it better on the slides. So again, this exceptionally high IQ. The IQ scores are in the top 2% compared to peers. And in the older ages, their like SAT scores will place them in the top 1% or higher. And then when they take like the MCAT or something, their scores will be higher than peers like that. The academically gifted students, they do have an above average IQ, but it's not typically as high as those exceptionally intellectually high. The exceptionally well in class, typically like all A's, and they do enjoy learning, have that high persistence and high motivation when they are faced with academic challenges. So the high potential to excel, these are students who would either fall under the exceptionally high intelligence or academically gifted, but for whatever reason, there have been circumstances that prevented them from falling under those two. So these can be socioeconomic status, environmental factors like pollution, crime, trauma, English language proficiency. So you can see how those might impact their ability to perform academically high, or environmental toxins might have impacted their early growth in brain development. So their IQ might be a little bit lower than it otherwise would have been. And then I kind of think and propose that sensory losses such as blindness or visual impairments could lower those two areas as well because of the incidental learning that takes place through just vision and other factors. So this is something I think could be taken into play or taken into consideration with gifted and talented program eligibility. Okay. And then one more note on this. These three categories are not mutually exclusive. A student could be academically gifted and still have more potential to excel. So they might be performing extremely well academically, but because of those other factors, they still might have room to excel more. Okay. So these are going to be traits of gifted and talented students, both those with and without visual impairments. And these are just general traits. They will apply to some of the students, but not all of them. So we generally see these students who are gifted and talented. They have advanced vocabulary and communication skills. So they have the vocabulary and they are able to communicate with those words appropriately. So they use the words that they know what they mean. They have a broad knowledge base. So these are like Jeopardy contestants and Jennings and the like. They're able to use or learn information quickly. So they have that quick learning efficiency and learning retrieval. They're curious and ask a lot of questions, and they're relevant questions. So they're not just asking why and what. And then some of them may demonstrate characteristics of perfectionism. A lot of times when they're given the WISC, their processing speed score will be lower than the other areas because they tend to take longer on coding and symbol search because they're not doing it as fast as they can. They're doing it to make sure they get all the items correct. Okay. So these are some general characteristics of students with visual impairments. So these are not the 2E students. So the age of onset influences their experiences. So whether it's congenital versus acquired, so whether it was at birth or whether it was acquired. So these students may have large vocabularies, but they don't understand the full meaning of the concept. So they may know words and a lot of words, but they don't fully understand what they mean, probably because they haven't been able to see the words or fully understand how to use it. Some have difficulty with social cues. They may not know how to interact appropriately with other peers. Again, some of this is vision and incidental learning. They may have fewer opportunities to exhibit leadership. This is because some of the adults around them aren't likely to put them in those positions. They might feel as though they might be a burden for the student, or it might be a burden for them to have to watch them and make sure they do things correctly. And then younger kids may begin conversations with a question. And so these are some general characteristics of the 2E BVI students. These students are more likely to be chosen for leadership roles. This is in comparison to the non-2E students. They're able to acquire visual information in unique ways. So again, with the lack of visual input, they're able to acquire this information uniquely. They're eager to learn, kind of like in the Renzulli model, that task area, they kind of fall under that trait. They're able to rapidly learn new skills that's related to their visual impairments. So like think of Braille, O&M, or technology. They have a good sense of humor, including sarcasm. They usually make me laugh a lot of times. They're curious, asking those good questions. They're able to find creative solutions to solve problems, kind of going in line with the ability to find new ways to find that visual information. And they're able to quickly learn information and then generalize it to new situations. Okay. And then now this is the referral and assessment system. So the Council for Exceptional Children, the Division for Visual Impairments, drafted a position paper, and I swear it said 2013, but I couldn't find the actual date. I just went with 2013. They drafted a position with recommendations regarding the identification, curricular modification, psychological needs and counseling, and specially trained teachers and support services. And so this is a really good paper. I will send it out for everyone who wants it. And then the next part of this is going to cover how to do this. Okay, so for gifted and talented eligibility, so this is another unique aspect of GNT. So the programs can either fall under SPED or general education, and each state, and then if it falls under general education, each LEA can have varying eligibility for GNT programs. And if it's under gen ed, some states don't have programs at all, or some districts don't have programs at all. And then in some states, they require the use of an alternate criteria for underrepresented groups. So like SES, race, and these are sometimes called Plan B or alternative models. I don't know why it's called Plan B, but again, I think some of those, looking at the third prong in the tripartite model, could fall under this Plan B or alternative model. Again, it has to be something that the state or district does. But again, I think that's something that these can fall under. So again, if an LEA has a GNT program, they are required to provide services to 2E students, regardless of if it's under SPED or general education. So they can't discriminate if a student has a disability, even if it's like a significant behavioral concern, they still are required to do those services. Then I went ahead of myself, saying the Plan B model is right here. Okay. So here's the general referral model for students not in SPED or districts that don't have SPED. They're generally administered a group assessment such as the COGAT or the Naglieri, and scores above 2% or 2% mean the student's eligible. So they're evaluated and then they're eligible. And then this is for most states in SPED. They're given a screener. And if they pass the screener, they're given a full assessment. So like an IQ, interviews, and then the team will determine eligibility. Okay. So for 2E students, there's no universal screener that is appropriate, and the COGAT and Naglieri are not appropriate. Okay. Yes, Beverly. I don't know if you can talk. I will be answering questions at the end. because I don't think people can talk at the moment. So yeah, that's an issue when we're looking at doing this. Because if we can't screen them, then we can't evaluate them in that process. Okay, so looking at alternate options for screening, we can have teacher or parents, or even peer nominations. When I say peer, I don't mean the peer going to the teacher, I think so-and-so should be in gifted. It's more the teacher recognizes that some peers are saying positive things about the student, like they're doing really well in this, they're doing awesome, they're smart, they're things like that. Review of the student's academic records. If the student is doing well in other courses, they're an all A student. If the student's passing their IEP goals successfully, they're mastering them very quickly. If their previous evaluation results, if their academic testing was above average, if their cognitive results were above average, that's something we should take into consideration. Okay. And then this is a general overview of different assessments. There's no standardized norm reference assessments that include BVI individuals in the sample population. There's just too many array of blind visual impairments to include in a normative sample. It just doesn't make sense to include it. So they just don't, which makes sense. Time subtests should be avoided. If you do administer them for some reason, interpret them qualitatively, and then a score should not be reported. Results are likely an underestimate of a student's true ability. And if you're unsure of what to do, reach out to a colleague, TVI, or your state school for the blind. Okay. When selecting assessments, select assessments that are appropriate for your student. Don't just go off what someone says or what I say, things like that. When thinking of accommodations and modification, look at your student's IEP for ideas. Those will be the best. They'll have input from your students' TVI, parents, teachers, and then look for assessments that include the broadest normative sample. So the ones that have samples from the most zip codes, the largest population sample, the most ethnically and culturally diverse. And then be sure to note any deviations from standardization and behavioral observations during the assessment. Okay. And then just a reminder, modifications result in a change in the test and possibility of the construct being changed. And then accommodations do not change what is being measured and are based on individual needs. So intellectual cognitive assessments. So verbal index scores, so like the VCI and VECI on the WISC, are often the best measure of a student's intellectual cognitive ability. You can administer other subtests, and it'd be good to see what they're capable of doing, but visual, spatial, and other time tests should be interpreted qualitatively or not administered at all. And don't report the full scale IQ or the equivalent score from that assessment. Academic achievement. So the Woodcock-Johnson 4, there's a large print version and a braille version of it, printed and made by American Printing House for the Blind. So those are good options. And the Woodcock-Johnson 5 just came out, and there was an article published by them about using it for different sensory losses. And then the KTEA and the Wyatt, they're both published by Pearson, and you're able to use it digitally, so you can blow up the screen if you are using it on like a computer to make it easier to see for students. But again, none of these are normed with students who are blind or visually impaired. So for social, emotional, and adaptive scales, a good one to use is the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment. And this uses a strength-based approach to look at areas like leadership, social skills, and things like that. And this looks at the strengths-based. Some of the other ones, like the BASC, Connors, and ABAS, tend to look for deficits and won't offer a lot of useful information regarding those G&T attributes. Another really good area to look at are some of those curriculum and classroom-based assessments. So like Acadiance, reading, or math, like the Dibbles, and then iReady, and et cetera. Definitely look at those classroom grades, classroom observations, looking to see how they interact with peers, how they interact in group settings. Are they on task? Are they using the technology given to them appropriately? How are they using that technology? How are they able to navigate the room? Are they given leadership positions? How are their social skills? All those things are important and related to gifted and talentedness, or giftedness. Okay. So these next ones are specifically related to giftedness. They are rating scales. The Gifted Rating Scale second edition is pretty recent. There's a teacher and home scale, and the teacher scale rates 6 areas that are specifically related to giftedness. So there's like leadership, creativity, artisticness, intellectual capacity, and can't remember the rest. But and then the parent one measures similar things. The Hope Teacher Rating Scale is really short. I think it's 20 questions. And then the SIGs, again, is pretty recent. And they measure similar things. It's a bit longer. But these are specifically for identifying talent or skills related to giftedness. And then here's a sample of the Hope Teacher Rating Scale. So it's sensitive to larger or deeper issues of human concern, is self-aware, is a leader within his or her group. So again, these are looking at positive attributes associated with giftedness, and can be used for all students, and it's pretty short and simple. There's more questions, but I had to crop it. Okay. Other things to look at. You can look at the ROI of Braille, O&M, and other goal progress compared to peers with similar goals. So whether it's at the school or peers in the district with similar goals, and compare to see whether it's faster or not. Look at sports, musical, artistic, and other non-academic accomplishments. Look at attendance records, disciplinary records. If they have perfect attendance and they're in difficult coursework, that shows that persistence. Disciplinary records, if they're having a lot of behavioral issues, that could mean, and therefore like off-task behavior, things like that, could be because they're bored with the coursework they're doing, or if there's like a lot of aggressive behaviors. It's important to look at the cause of the behaviors or what they are. And then interviews with parents, teachers, and the students to see what they think of the overall. Okay, so for the upcoming webinar, me, Megan Adams, and Mandy Gall sent out a survey last spring. We asked information about districts' overall demographics, the number of students in their G&T programs, and the number of 2E students, their classifications, and different assessments to use. So we will be discussing the results of that. And then, so those two will be joining us. And then Marnay Lofton, who is retired from the Texas School for Blind and Visually Impaired, who kind of got me going in this area, will also be coming. So hope you'll come for that. And then I have answers to some previously submitted questions. This person asked, are there any standardized intelligence batteries that have norming for the BVI population? And I kind of went over that. No, there are not any currently. And then, are there verbal tests for the BVI population when we consider the link between vision and incidental learning? And I would say they are the fairest. And then we should also consider whether the vision loss was congenital versus acquired. So whether they had a degree to acquire that incidental learning, and then when they lost the vision, the degree to a vision loss, whether it's like color vision loss, peripheral vision loss, or total vision loss. And then the role of hearing in incidental learning, because there's still a lot of incidental learning that occurs through hearing. So while they're definitely not fair, they're the fairest thing we have to use. So I hope that answers that person's question. Okay, this person asked, is the percentage of blind or visually impaired children who are also gifted and talented similar to that found in the general population of students? So I don't know for sure, but I'm going to say unlikely. So there's genetic conditions and other syndromes that cause blindness, visual impairments, in addition to developmental delays and intellectual disabilities. So that alone probably makes it unlikely that there will be the same number of students who are blind, visually impaired, and gifted. Then also kind of going back to our survey that we did. So we had 49 districts respond. And again, that's a very small sample, but 0 reported 2E BVI students in their programs. So again, that's not definitive data. And I can't say yes or no definitively, but I would venture to say it's unlikely. Okay. And then the last one submitted early was, how does the intersection of disability and giftedness uniquely affect their social emotional needs? For this one, I went with I went with BVI gifted and talented students only, specifically. So the other gifted and talented students really can't relate to the unique needs of them. They need additional specific social emotional skills, teaching them how those um, social or communication skills, as well as some difficulty with resiliency, resourcefulness, because they are the 2E BVI students will be more likely to fail on certain things than the non-visually impaired students if they're doing the same things in the gifted and talented class. Um, it'll just happen when you're having to do creating different um, dioramas and things like that. You'll need a teacher there to help you when all the other students won't have that extra support needing. It'll affect their self-esteem having to have a teacher right there helping them all the time. So they'll need extra support, and their other friends won't need that, and it'll affect their confidence too. Um, you might have been asking about all 2E students, but I just answered for BVI now that I'm reading it. So, yeah, sorry about that. Okay. Right. Other questions? Oops, that's not it.
Hi, Brian. We had a few questions come in about your slides. People are wanting a copy of your slides. Will a copy
Oh,
be made available?
yeah, I can send those.
Great. Thank you. Um, The other questions were primarily related to the resources you mentioned, and we
Yeah,
drop a couple links in the chat, but we can definitely connect to make sure we send out your slides and any of the specific resources you mentioned. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat or in the Q&A box. And I super duper apologize for anyone who had trouble logging in. I got a slew of emails saying that Zoom made them re-registered. Hopefully with our next event, we'll have Zoom all figured out. So thank you for your patience, and hooray for those of you who were able to log on. Um, so far, I'm not seeing any other questions coming up in the chat. And I'll just ask the question, Brian. So in your district, how have you seen our students who, or in any of your experience, not even your current district, how have you seen gifted students being supported in the G&T program for our blind and low vision students or deafblind students?
no answer. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. I've actually seen kids who were in SPED not taken out for the gifted test. They just stayed in the SPED room.
And unfortunately, I think that's not an uncommon experience. I have heard from some others where the students who have different sensory loss are excluded from testing, which is not okay. We should be trying to find alternative means to find eligibility for the gifted and talented program. I know that some people have to advocate more for their students to be able to access like AP classes, um, like when the gifted and talented program isn't offered beyond elementary school, just like looking at high school and things. And just for anyone who is wondering, Brian has graciously shared his email so that you can contact him if you think of questions later. And I am seeing a couple questions come in. I'll read first the question that came in through the Q&A, and then I'll bring up the question from the chat. So, is there current advocacy efforts for public policy changes to address these issues when identifying and appropriately providing these services to blind visually impaired students? Turning it over to you, Brian.
So I don't know of any assessment that is only verbal, but I would say that the best practice is to use verbal only when providing a overall score for a student with a visual impairment that is so much so that they can't, in your professional opinion, use and provide an accurate score on like the VSI or the PSI. So I would argue that the VECI is the best estimate of their overall ability. And I think I have
Oh, and just
Marnie.
for reference for those who might be following along in ASL, so I believe Brian is addressing Ashley's question from the chat. Do you have any resources that we can use to cite to support the use of a verbal only cognitive measure? My district requires a global IQ for giftedness, but I'd like to suggest something to cite to maybe suggest using something more verbally focused.
I have a source and I can provide it. I just cannot provide it right now. I will send me an email and then I will get it to you and everyone.
Thank you. And then going over to Kathleen's question, is there current advocacy efforts for public policy changes to address these issues when identifying and appropriately providing these services to our blind and low vision students? I am not currently aware of any advocacy efforts for public policy change. Are you, Brian?
Mandy and Megan and I are, that's kind of why we did the study to see what people were doing for evaluating and doing eligibility. And we found out they're not even identifying them at all. So we're trying to come up with at least an idea of how to make them eligible uniformly. But it's a work in progress. We've been doing it, but like a year and a half now, I think. So we're slowly doing it.
All right, thank you, Brian. And I believe you were talking about the VCI and the use of the WISC VCI for our population. I will drop into a chat one of the technical reports. I'm not sure if it's one that you were referencing earlier. But it goes into the different expanded scores from the WISC. Is that what you were referencing? You click the link.
No, but this might be good too.
All right, and I'm seeing that there's no other questions in the chat or through email. So far, it's mostly about getting the slides, so everyone's eager to get a copy of your slides. Um, just to provide a couple of resources while people might be thinking of other questions. Um, we do have a handout that has a list of subtests that are verbally administered. So most of the tests listed in here do not include visuals. Or if they do, there's a note about where the visuals end. So that might be helpful when you're thinking of alternative ways of doing assessment. I believe there is also a well, within that link, there are lists of tests that are available in large print and Braille. The WJ, as we know, is available, like Brian said, in large print and Braille for the 4th edition. The 5th edition, I know the American Printing House for the Blind and Riverside are in talks, but the last time they made an update, it took quite a while before the Braille adaptation came out. So we don't quite know when that might be happening, but fingers crossed that it'll be sooner rather than later. And Brian, do you have, oh, there's a thank you in the Q&A for the information. Brian, do you have any last thoughts that you might want to share about giftedness in general for our population before we end our webinar today?
Oh, no. I mean, don't be afraid to advocate for the kids. Yeah, and if you have any questions, you can ask whoever, including me. But just remember, I can't do anything for your kid. I can help you. Yeah, ask away.
All right, and there's a couple comments in the chat for saying thank you to you, Brian. Thank you so much for sharing your information and research. We hope that we'll have much more information about this topic moving forward. But if you have any thoughts or questions, we will have another chance for you to ask those questions or share those thoughts. We will have a giftedness panel discussion on September 15th. I'm going to drop the registration link in the chat. And again, that panel will include our awesome Brian here, as well as Marnay and Megan and Mandy. So we'll have quite a few people to share their ideas. As you are exiting this webinar, if you could please provide your feedback. Again, apologies for any technical glitches with logging into the webinar. Besides that, please let us know if there's anything we can improve for future webinars, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you, everyone.